I want to look at, because it applies to everybody, is whether you're doing enterprise systems or whether you're doing the information security and assurance side of the assignment and the questions. I want to look at the impact of the international standard, the ISO 27002, which is information governance, or standards for information governance, and the ideas we had about the big data Vs. So it will be kind of useful to have a copy of ISO 27002 to hand, either now or a little bit later, so that you can actually work through from both perspectives, whether you're looking at information security and assurance and all of those questions, or whether you're looking at enterprise systems, which is the sort of ideas to do with implementing enterprise systems effectively and securely, looking at the various opportunities and so on. But particularly that last question in the assignment, which is operations. Operations is governed dramatically or assisted by a good understanding of 27002. It's in 14 chapters or thereabouts, and something like 135 individual questions as posed in the subsections to the various chapters or sections of the 27002. And I'll give you a little list of those in a few minutes. And then we'll go back in our memories to 2 or 3 weeks ago when we looked at what was then the 12 Vs of big data, but now, as a result of input from someone here, an extra couple, which actually add some really interesting ideas about big data and the Internet of Things. It's taken us up to 14 Vs now. But what I want to, so I shall show you what those two things are, and you may well need to connect in so you can download into either enterprise systems or into ISA to week 7, and at the bottom of the list of activities and things to do, you'll find this little presentation. Because what I really want to concentrate on today is not the actual content that's in there. That's easy to find, easy to think about, easy to read about. I want us to think particularly about what's fundamental to this module, or these two modules. And that is to think about what are the consequences of these two ways of looking at the use and management and implementation of systems around big data analytics, the Internet of Things, which gives you even bigger data analytics questions. So I want to think about consequences. I care very, very little about description of what's in either of these things. But I care passionately about the consequences of what these two frameworks, in terms of their questions they pose to us, what do they mean in terms of using information systems in general, the practice of computer forensics, how you guarantee the integrity of that data that you're using to build that case for prosecution perhaps, or defense as an expert witness. How does all this lot hang together? What are the consequences, and how do you bring together these two different ways of looking at the issues of big data and the Internet of Things in all of those questions? So you've got 6 questions for ISA, you've got 4 questions for enterprise systems, so we've got 10 questions that you're kind of covering in this whole thing. And so I want us to think about, in small groups in the discussions, about some of the consequences and bringing together those ideas. Because if you bring together the questions of the 12, 14 Vs and the 14 chapters that are relevant in ISO 27002, by looking at the world from 2 different perspectives and synthesizing those consequences, those implications, those ideas, you come up with novel ideas, novel ways of making sure that we can use our information securely, safely, generate some of the value that we're needing from the 12 Vs to 14 Vs that will help us to get really useful things happening in the companies we're advising. Really useful things that you're putting into your articles that will make them a must-read to those people out there who will be seeing them when they're published. So these are what I'm really trying to get at. Two useful ways of looking at the world, but then bring them together. Now, these are chapters 5 through 18, I think it is, yeah, of ISO 27002 version 2013, which is the very, very latest version. In essence, these are the same sort of chapters, but restructured as there was in the 2008 version, I think it was the previous version. So it covers issues like the information security policies that an organization needs to have secure use of information technology systems. It provides a set of questions about how information security is actually organized, and also read into the word, instead of the word security, the word governance, doing the right thing in the right way, etc., etc. It then looks at questions of people, the human resource issues of security and governance. It looks at questions of how we manage all of our assets. Now, our assets in this term is not necessarily the physical assets of the room spaces or the server rooms, but it's also other assets like people. People are assets of an organization. They are the people who provide value ultimately. Yeah, there's a big debate about how valuable information is and whether a value in an organization is its information systems, the information it holds electronically or on paper or wherever, or is it just the physical resources like the laptops, the network and the servers, whether it's private cloud or whether it's out there in the public cloud or hybrid or whatever. All of these things are kind of assets, things that we kind of own in one way or another. We then look at, briefly, there's a short chapter on cryptography and how that should be managed to provide secure communications, how to provide security for the data that we hold. And you know, there are questions all the time about why is the data that companies hold not encrypted? Why is it so easy for hackers to get in and download everything in clear? You know, if you ever have to sign up to a website, for example, where they will email you your password, if you forget your password, then you know you have a really serious issue with that company. No organization, no website should ever be able to send you your password to remind you. Because that means they are storing it in text, clear text form somewhere on a server, somewhere or other. It must be one-way encrypted, and this is something that the University of Cambridge developed, say, 40-odd years ago plus, maybe more. But when I was there in 1970 on the old Titan Atlas computer, they had a hardware encryption. So when you signed in, gave your password, it was one-way encrypted and stored in an encrypted form, and when you tried to log in, your password went through the encryption system, and was then compared with the stored encrypted version of your password. They could not give you your password back to let you back in. You had to create a new password or get the system administrators to give you a temporary new password, like they do here. That was back developed in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, that sort of approach. And yet, how many websites that you go on to, if you forget your password, how many of them send you your password back? Any ideas? Quite a few, isn't it? Don't deal with them. They have no security. Your password is open effectively to the world. So there's all sorts of things in here, and also how you transfer the keys, you know, whether you've got public keys, private keys, all the other things that you guys in forensics know about in terms of cryptography. It's a fairly short chapter, but again, it's kind of interesting. And given the amount of our data, or amount of data that's being generated by the Internet of Things, which is traceable directly to you or me, in one way or another, that could be quite an important issue. Whether it's, stuff at home, there's data about our cars, some of you who've got boxes in the boot of your car, which is tracking everything you do so that Aviva or whoever the company is can look at your driving style and say, you were going 80 mph. You're uninsured then, or we're going to increase your insurance premium back to standard, 2,500 quid a year or something exciting, if you start breaking the law in one way or another. How's that stored? Because that box is in my car, or your car, all of it's available, the company can see it, probably the police will be allowed to see it if you have an accident that's your cause, you caused it. Even if you're actually a victim, they may well get into it to see whether you were breaking the law and so on. So how's all this affected by cryptography and preventing or assisting access to that private data that's yours? Think about the Data Protection Act and the European data protection regime. How's all that fit together? Physical and environmental security, that comes back in some sense to your asset management and your asset control. Because for asset management and access control, together, how do we make sure the right people get into, not just logging into the systems, but getting access to the racks with all the switches in, for example, into the server rooms. Access control also in terms of the software. What are your control mechanisms as your software development team develop and modify the software? That's covered in there. It has an implication back into there as well. We then think physical and environmental security. Again, that comes back and links into access control, asset management. I have an interesting example. Once upon a time, I know of an organisation that had a little problem. They had a good security fence around most of the site, lots and lots of security personnel in various places, but one of the buildings, a two-floor building with 200-300 people in it on 2 floors, with their own little server rooms in one of the corners, on both floors, but one corner of that building stuck outside the security fence. And there was a fire exit door on that wall directly onto a very wide pavement. Now, it turns out that that particular area was sort of visible to at least one, if not two security guards in 2 security posts, but they weren't watching at the time. Somebody brought along an estate car, parked it on the pavement, because it's a nice big wide, sort of 10-metre wide pavement there, right near that fire exit door. Somehow, one or more people got into the secure area. How they did it, I do not know. The story didn't have that. The first anyone knew anything had happened was when the alarm went off on one of the alarm boards saying a fire door has been opened. Unfortunately, this was too late because by that time, the characters who had looked as though they were meant to be there, they'd gone into the unlocked server room, removed 2 processors, boxes, Unix workstation boxes, fortunately left all the storage arrays behind, carried them through the building, through the busy office area, open plan office area, to the corner, by the fire door, dunk, open the door, pop these 2 boxes worth £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 each in 20-year-old money, popped them in the back of the car and drove off. No one had thought of the security implications of having your fire exit door straight onto the pavement outside of the secure perimeter. So by being careless about the physical security, being careless about access control into the server room, which should have been locked with a key in the possession of authorized personnel only, but no, that's too difficult because they were in and out of that all day, so they didn't bother to lock the server room. So by breaking ideas, or ignoring various questions that come out of the details of these chapters, they got problems with that one, they had problems with that one, with a consequence that they lost 2 very valuable server boxes. Fortunately, as I say, the thieves didn't walk off with the disk arrays, which were seriously valuable because they had 6 or 8 SCSI hard drives in each of them. Each of those SCSI hard drives in those days was worth £2,000. So there's about 30, 40, 50,000 quid's worth of SCSI hard drives in those 2 boxes, which were much more valuable than the bits they walked off with. But fortunately, they left those behind. But there are other questions, and you'll be able to see what they are when you look at that. Then there's communication security. So, we're getting more and more worried these days about the privacy of our communications over the internet, over our mobile phones. The Snowden reports gives us an awful lot of ideas about what's really happening in terms of monitoring communications. And it's caused the intelligence services around the world a lot of problems, because suddenly things that people in the know knew about, but most of the terrorists didn't know about, now they know what they need to do. And what they're now doing, apart from using some of their more encrypted, more difficult to tap communications channels, they're realizing that actually the only secure form of communication, if you have bad intent, whether it's ordinary criminals or whether it's anything else, the only secure form of communication is face-to-face, ultimately. And they're beginning to do that sort of thing. Now, we can't do that in business, so we have to think about communication security. And if you think back to about 5 years ago, there's an organization called SWIFT, which provides the communication systems between every bank in the world so they can transfer money securely between each other. It's a European-based company, and it used to have its server environment as a single environment for the whole world's worth of banks based in Switzerland. However, the European Parliament got a little bit twitchy because of the somewhat unofficial arrangement, particularly with the USA security agencies, that they would have access to all of the data flowing through SWIFT for the prevention of terrorism, money laundering, and sort of serious crime. And this kind of is a problem in the European environment where, in principle, by and large, no security agencies or law enforcement agencies have access to private data without a proper warrant from the court system or legal process system. And as a result, they eventually insisted to SWIFT that they took those servers out of Switzerland and brought them fully into the European Union environment. And I seem to remember they built 2 sets of environments in Belgium or Holland, I forget which of the 2 it was. One for, you might say, the European Union banking system, and the other one, rest of the world. The intention was that the European Union set would be impervious to the American security agencies, but the Americans could get into the rest of world servers and do whatever, all their trawling and data collection they tend to do. And that happened a few years ago. There's still a few problems with it and a few debates going on, but this was because they were worried about agencies outside of Europe who do not necessarily adhere to the data protection regime, do not necessarily have the requirement for proper warrants for investigation with probable cause and so on. They wanted to protect that for the European Union. Now, I suspect that ultimately almost all the world's banks will go into the European environment as far as they can, and there won't be many left in the other one, but who knows? We'll find out one day, perhaps. So there's a lot of questions about communication security. There are also interesting issues about the whole process, and this comes back to the enterprise systems people. System acquisition, development, and maintenance. And by acquisition, we do not just mean I'm buying it off the shelf. It's the whole process of requirements capture, making the decision about who's going to deliver it, whether it's us internally, or whether we'll go out for subcontractors, or whether we'll buy it, how you then bring it in, configure it, develop it, test it, prove it, pass it off, pop it into service, and then in the future carry on with the ongoing maintenance to keep those systems up to date and doing what the business needs to obtain value. There's a chapter then on the relationship between the suppliers you've thought about here, or in terms of your communication security systems, ISPs, and all of the others. Lots of interesting questions there, all about essentially ensuring that just because you have got suppliers in-house with access under access control regimes, that prevents them doing what happened, for example, in Target, where they had, some malware was dumped in on the system by a third-party contractor. One of them broke the rules, dropped some, broke the rules and dumped some malware onto the system, which proliferated and allowed them to extract that 17 million sets of ID. So there's some interesting questions in there about how you do that. And when you think about the enormous amount of big data related information that's around there, you really do need to make sure that you've got a really good handle on how you are managing your suppliers so that you actually can ensure and guarantee the integrity and safety and security of all of that data you've got. When things go wrong, well, you have a security incident. So you need a set of questions, a set of processes in place so that you can learn, well, first of all, you identify you've had an incident. You need to know what you're supposed to do when you've got an incident and how you record the information, review it, so you can close down that loophole for the future. And then, having done all of that, you have to think about the question of, okay, here we've built a big set of equipment, we've got a huge amount of extremely valuable data that would be extremely embarrassing if anybody hacked into it and extracted it. But what happens if something goes wrong? Our data center gets flooded, it gets burnt down, it gets knocked over, whatever. Flooded. How do we keep our organization operating until we can get that physical chunk of assets back up and running? Business continuity management. And you can look at ISO 25999 is one of the ISO standards relating to business continuity planning and management. You can find 20 or 30 websites around the world, professional websites, so they're authoritative, who give a lot of advice about how you plan your business continuity plans, how you execute it, how you practice them, so that you know that if anything goes wrong, you can still protect the cash flow into your company. Because if you haven't got cash flow, your company will vanish overnight. If you've got cash flow, because you've got records somewhere of all of the orders that you're satisfying and so on, then you can keep your business running and keep the money flowing in so you can at least pay your staff and maybe some of your suppliers. That's what it is. But continuity management also asks you questions about some of your most important resources. Yeah, your physical server environment, the protection and backup and easy access and implementation of your data, but also, importantly, key people. Many organizations, whether small or large, have a few very, very critically important people, single people who, if they go under a bus, your company is in trouble. The man under the bus problem is really serious for many organizations, and they don't normally do very much about it. So if they lose a critical person, and this is particularly important ultimately for small businesses and medium-sized businesses who can only afford one expert who knows everything, that person leaves the organisation for whatever reason or goes under a bus, you've got a problem. Okay, so we've got 13 chapters there, lots and lots of questions about how to do this governance thing of our whole information systems, electronic and paper, and people, and hardware, and rooms, and equipment, and so on. And we maybe have got lots and lots of procedures and policies that say this is how it all should be done. It's great to have those processes and procedures and working practices in lots and lots of documents, whatever. But if you look at the very beginning section of ISO 27002, section 0.2 in this version, 0.3 in preceding versions, the third part of the underpinning of an information governance and security system like this, the third part is ensuring compliance with internal procedures. In other words, yeah, we've got all the paperwork, but actually, are we doing it? So, compliance ultimately is very, very important. And in many businesses, many fields of business, compliance is an irritation and people forget to do it. So people don't actually know at a senior level whether anybody is doing any of this. Are they doing it effectively or not? So, a set of 14 sets of questions. So that's one perspective on information governance. ISO 27002, the 2013 version. Now, a few weeks ago, we looked at these V's for big data. I've added on 2 new ones. These ones, place and kind of fluffiness. It goes back, I mean, that's it. The vagueness one is a little bit like some of the questions of verbosity, but it relates to the fact, in a sense, that we don't understand necessarily which part of the data is subject to that 80% we don't really know the veracity of. So it sort of links to the text problem of we don't know the meanings of words very much, and we don't necessarily know the truth of that particular chunk of data. So these were the questions we looked at a few weeks ago. A different way of looking at our equipment, our information, but particularly this is related to the information, whereas ISO 27002 is wider than the information is. So all of the people, all of the hardware, all of the buildings, as well as these sort of questions about the data. So, if we put all that together, 3, to me, there are probably more, but there are 3 very, very fundamental questions about bringing together 2 very, very different types of frameworks. First question, how do they interact? How do you see that? And now you're going to need to look into ISO 27002 a little bit to see some of the more detailed questions amongst those 14 chapters. Part of the way to answer that is to think about, are there common themes? And part of it is to think then about relationships and impact. And the synthesis is bringing those 2 together to come up with really powerful questions. So for the next 10 minutes or so, what I want you to do in your groups is to, I'll leave that up there for you. I would like you to get hold of 27002 2013, have a brief skirmish at some, and I would suggest what you do is just look at the table of contents, because it shows you both that list of 14 chapters, but within each chapter, the subsections at the dot 1 level, the first dot. So you see 14.1.2, 14.1, 14.2, 14.3, and so on. And that gives you, again, another set of more detail within the questions set by those 14 chapters. You've got this little presentation is available for you on both ES and ISA now in week 7 at the bottom of the list. And I want you to think about A, the common themes bit, and B, any relationships. And then in about 10, 12 minutes time, we'll have a very brief summary of some of the most important points that you've come up with. And the purpose is for you to be able to use this sort of information to add value and richness to your assignment, to your article. Because these are two fundamental ways of looking at big data, the Internet of Things, and those questions of ethics and governance and so on.